and offerings that were required of the Old Covenant church. The sacrificial system, of course, was brought to an end with the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. However, though, we do know that the sacrifices will be reinstituted again in the millennium. Now, the first several chapters of the book of Leviticus are dedicated to the sacrifices and offerings. And there are 5 main sacrifices defined in the first 5 chapters of Leviticus. And many people assume that all 5 of these sacrifices are related to sin. If we turn over to Hebrews chapter 5, verse 1, Hebrews 5, verse 1, we'll see here what Paul writes, and he says, For every high priest taken from among men is appointed for men in things pertaining to God, that he may offer both gifts or offerings and sacrifices for sins. There were sacrifices for offerings or gifts, and then those that are sacrifices for sins. They are distinctly 2 different categories here. Out of the 5 that are defined here in the first chapters of Leviticus, only 2 actually are about sin or relating to sin. The first 3 that are defined are gifts. They are worship and thanksgiving offerings. And they are about sacrifice and devotion to God as a way of life. They are the giving of oneself to God. Chapter 1 is the whole burnt offering, which is an animal sacrifice. And we'll turn over there to Leviticus chapter 1 and beginning in verse 1. And I briefly want to cover just the beginning here. Leviticus 1, we'll read verses 1 through 4, but it says, Now the Lord called to Moses and spoke to him from the tabernacle of meeting, saying, Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when any one of you brings an offering to the Lord, you shall bring an offering from your livestock, one of the herd or of the flock. If his offering is a burnt sacrifice of the herd, let him offer a male without blemish. He shall offer it of his own free will at the door of the tabernacle of meeting before the Lord. So the burnt offering here again is totally a free will offering. It was not a required offering, and it was not a required offering for sin. Verse 4, Then he shall put his hand on the head of the burnt offering, and it will be accepted on his behalf to make atonement for him. Because the word atonement is used here, many classify this as a sin offering. And I was surprised in the research that I did that one individual not in the church that did very good going through the book of Leviticus, and then he comes back and says, this is the best sin offering of all. No, it is not a sin offering. There is no mention of sin in this offering. It is totally, again, a free will offering. The dictionary definition of atone is to make reparation or supply satisfaction for, but atone has its roots in the idea of reconciliation and harmony, or in this case, it'd be primarily harmony. It grew out of the Middle English phrase under the meaning in harmony. So this offering is a matter of drawing nearer to God and getting in harmony with God. It is the dedicating of oneself to God. And again, it is not an offering for sin. Chapters 2 is the meal or the grain offering, and that offering does not involve any animals whatsoever, or no shedding of blood is involved with the grain offering. Chapter 3 is the peace or the fellowship offering, which is an animal sacrifice. And in this case, the offerer shares a meal with God, with the priest, and with his friends or whatever common people are involved there, as long as they are clean. Again, these 3 offerings are not about sin. These offerings were totally voluntary, and they are not sacrifices for sin. It isn't until we get to chapter 4 that the sin offering is defined, and chapter 5 is the trespass offering, and these 2 offerings do involve sin. Here, sin, the Hebrew basically is kata, means to miss the mark. These are sins not out of rebellion, but it's just missing the mark. It's just human failure, basically. Chapter 5 is the trespass offering, and it is a sin. It's more guilt and usually more action involved in that. The distinction between the offerings of Leviticus 4 and 5 is the sin offering of Leviticus 4 covers more our evil nature or the sins of the heart that are in the heart, where the trespass offering in chapter 5 atones for basically the fruits of that nature, or it's the actual activity, and there's different penalties involved depending on what the trespass was. Today we will focus on the general sin offering of Leviticus 4 and the uniqueness and differences then of the sin offering on the Day of Atonement that was offered. But before we get into the offerings, we need to look at two different altars that were in the tabernacle that play a significant role concerning the sacrifices. And these, if we turn to Exodus chapter 27, beginning in verse 1, the first of these is the altar of burnt offering. And Exodus 27, verse 1, it says, "You shall make an altar of acacia wood, 5 cubits long and 5 cubits wide. The altar shall be square, and its height shall be 3 cubits. You shall make its horns on 4 corners. Its horns shall be of one piece with it, and you shall overlay it with bronze." So this is a bronze altar. "You shall also make pans to receive its ashes, and its shovels, and its basins, its forks, its fire pans, etc. You shall make all these utensils of bronze." So this is the bronze, or the what they call the brazen altar. Verse 4, it says, "You shall make a grate for it, a network of bronze, and in the network you shall make 4 bronze rings at its 4 corners. You shall put it under the rim of the altar beneath, that the network may be midway up the altar. And you shall make poles for the altar, poles of acacia wood, and overlay them with bronze. The poles shall be put in as rings, and the poles shall be on the 2 sides of the altar to bear it. And you shall make it hollow with boards as was shown you on the mountain, so they make it." So here, it's also known as the great brazen altar, or bronze altar. It was placed between the sanctuary and the gate, and basically nearer the gate than the sanctuary. So it actually was some distance from the Holy of Holies in the tabernacle and later in the temple. And again, it was covered in bronze. The second altar we're concerned with is the altar of sweet incense, and we'll find that described in Exodus chapter 30, beginning in verse 1. Exodus 30, verse 1. And it says, "You shall make an altar to burn incense on, and you shall make it of acacia wood. A cubit shall be its length, and a cubit its width. It shall be square, and 2 cubits shall be its height. Its horns shall be 1 piece with it. And you shall overlay its top, all its sides, and its horns with pure gold. And you shall make it for a molding of gold all around." So this is referred to as the golden altar of incense. We'll continue in chapter 40 of Exodus, verse 26. Exodus 40:26, it says, "He put the gold altar, or the altar of incense, in their tabernacle of meeting in front of the veil." So the altar of incense was next to the veil, meaning it was very close, or as close as you can get to the Holy of Holies. It was right up against the Holy of Holies. And it was the closest to God's presence. Now, in Revelation chapter 8, verses 3 and 4, we're familiar with these verses, but Revelation 8, 3 and 4, it says, "Then another angel having a golden censer came and stood at the altar, and he was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne." So the golden altar in the tabernacle, which was next to the Holy of Holies, represents the heavenly golden altar which is before God's throne, and incense, of course, being the prayers of the saints. Okay, back in Exodus chapter 30, verse 4. And the smoke of the incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand. Oh, I'm sorry, that was Revelation. But okay, so with that then, we will now look at the instructions for the sin offering. And as we go through the instructions for the sin offering, we will see that God deals with the sins of ignorance, which is basically what the sin offering is for. He deals with it from the top down, starting with the priest, then with the entire congregation, then the civil leaders, and at last the individual, on the individual basis. We will see, with that, we will see that the offerings required varied depending on basically on the amount of accountability of who was making the offering, and no one was excluded because it gets down to the individual level. So we'll start now in Leviticus chapter 4, verse 1. And it says, "Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, If a person sins unintentionally," the complete Jewish Bible says inadvertently, "against any of the commandments of the Lord, and anything which ought not to be done, and does them." So again, this sacrifice was for unintentional sins, or sins committed through ignorance or error. This would also include sins done as a result of just plain human weakness or frailty. And again, we know, I'm going to quote a couple verses here. Romans 6:23, "The wages of sin is death." And unfortunately, that also includes those sins done in ignorance. It does bring the death penalty. In Psalm 19, verse 12, it's a short verse, I'll just read it here quickly. It says, "Who can understand his errors? Cleanse me from secret faults." So again, these are the sins that are covered by the sin offering. Hebrews 10, verses 26 to 27. Hebrews 10, 26 to 27, it says, "For if we sin willfully after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sin, but a certain fearful expectation of judgment and fiery indignation which will devour the adversaries." So basically here he's saying that sins done in rebellion to God required the death penalty. They still do. The death penalty is required when those sins are out of rebellion, in which case this sin offering in the Old Testament would not have covered. So there are 4 different sacrificial requirements depending on who the sacrifice was for or who was making the sacrifice. And the first of these begins in verse 3 of chapter 4. It says, "If the anointed priest sins, brings guilt on the people, then let him offer to the Lord for his sin which he has sinned a young bull without blemish as a sin offering." And again, this is the sin is missing the mark. It's interesting, in the Hebrew, the word offering is not there. It is implied, but it is not actually there. It's just the word sin, which the root of it means it's penalty or an offender. And so we'll continue in verse 4. "He shall bring the bull to the door of the tabernacle of meeting before the Lord, lay his hand on the bull's head, and kill the bull before the Lord." So the priest was to offer a bull, and he was to lay his hand, singular, on the bull's head. And I have a question mark. Why only one hand, or why specifically one hand? If anybody's got an answer to that, you can come up with one. Okay. The Hebrew also means it's an open hand. It's not a fist. But also the laying on the hand was not just a gentle pat or touch on the head. It meant more with the pressing down, applying some pressure, pressing down. And of course, we do understand that as through the laying on of hand, the bull became the substitute, or the sin of the individual is now transferred to that animal. Verse 5, "The anointed priest shall take some of the bull's blood and bring it to the tabernacle of meeting. The priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle some of the blood 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil of the sanctuary. Again, the veil separates the Holy of Holies, so it's done just before the Holy of Holies. And the priest shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of sweet incense before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle of meeting. Again, this altar, this is the golden altar that is right up against the veil. The altar of incense stood in the back of the room, called the holy place, against the veil that separated the holy place from the second room, or the Holy of Holies. It separated it from the Holy of Holies. Of course, the Holy of Holies we know represents God's throne, or God's throne room, and the blood did not go into the Holy of Holies on this sacrifice. Continuing in verse 7, it says, "And he shall pour the remaining blood at the base of the altar of the burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle of meeting." Again, that's the outer altar, the brazen, the bronze altar that is farther out. "He shall take from it all the fat of the bull as the sin offering, the fat that covers the entrails, and all the fat which is on the entrails, the 2 kidneys and the fat that is on them by the flanks, and the fatty lobe attached to the liver above the kidneys, he shall remove. As it was taken from the bull of the sacrifices of the peace offering," and basically the same method, that "the priest shall burn them on the altar of burnt offerings." So the fat here is burned on this altar of burnt offerings. "But the bull's hide and all its flesh, and its head and legs and entrails and offal, the whole bull he shall carry outside the camp to a clean place where the ashes are poured out, and burn it on wood with fire. Where the ashes are poured out, it shall be burned." So again, the fat was burned on the altar of burnt offering, but the rest of the animal was taken outside of the camp to be burned. And think of it, say that there were 1 million or so people in the camp at that time. He had to take it some distance to get it outside of the camp to a place where he could burn it. That's a whole bull. That's a lot of animal to be hauling a considerable distance. It wasn't a 5-minute procedure that happened here. In Hebrews chapter 13, hold your place here because we keep coming back to Leviticus, but Hebrews 13 verse 11, it says, "For the bodies of those animals whose blood is brought into the sanctuary by the high priest for sin are burned outside the camp." And of course, verses 6 and 7, the priest had taken some of the blood and sprinkled it in front of the veil and put some on the golden altar of incense in the sanctuary there. But it says, "Therefore, Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered outside the gate." So in verse 13, we hit the second category, or the second group of people, and it says, "Now if the whole congregation of Israel sins unintentionally, and the thing is hidden from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done something against any of the commandments of the Lord in anything that should not be done, and are guilty." Today, it doesn't apply to all of the congregation. Does not mean all the individuals in the congregation. It basically means the leaders. So in today's world, it would be the elders, or say the council of elders, or perhaps the board of directors that are involved in the organization. But it is the leaders of the congregation here that this applies to. And again, they are held in higher accountability than the individual member. Don't turn here, but in James 3:1, it says, "My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we all shall receive a stricter judgment." So there is definitely a higher accountability to those who are in the positions of teaching, or in the ministry, or the leadership in the church. We'll continue with verse 14 in Leviticus 4. It says, "When the sin which they have committed becomes known, then the assembly shall offer a young bull for the sin and bring it before the tabernacle of meeting. And the elders of the congregation shall lay their hands on the head of the bull before the Lord." Again, the sin is being transferred to the animal here, with the laying on of hands. Then the bull shall be killed before the Lord. The anointed priest shall bring some of the bull's blood to the tabernacle of meeting. Then the priest shall dip his finger in the blood and sprinkle it 7 times before the Lord in front of the veil. And he shall put some of the blood on the horns of the altar which is before the Lord, which is in the tabernacle of meeting. And he shall pour the remaining blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering, which is at the door of the tabernacle. The altar which is before the Lord again would be the altar of incense. And he shall take the fat from it and burn it on the altar, and he shall do with the bull as he did with the bull as a sin offering. Thus he shall do it, so the priest shall make atonement for them, and it shall be forgiven them. Again here now, the word atonement figuratively means to placate or to cancel. It's interpreted different times as appease, to make an atonement for, to cleanse, to disannul, to forgive, to be merciful, to pacify, to pardon there. Then verse 21 will continue. It says, then he shall carry the bull outside the camp and burn it as he burned the first bull. It is a sin offering for the assembly. So the procedure for the so-called congregation here was basically the same as it was for the priest. The third category now is verse 22. It says, when a ruler has sinned, and this basically would be a civic leader, and done something unintentionally against any of the commandments of the Lord, his God, and anything which should not be done, and is guilty, or his sin which he has committed comes to his knowledge, he shall bring as his offering a kid of the goats, a male without blemish. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the goat and kill it at the place where they kill the burnt offering before the Lord. It is a sin offering. The one doing the offering does the killing of this goat. Verse 25, the priest shall take some of the blood of the sin offering with his finger and put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering. Of course, this is the outer altar with the bronze altar, and pour its blood at the base of the altar of burnt offering. There is no sprinkling of the blood in front of the veil, and nor is there any putting of the blood on the horns of the altar of sweet incense, or on the incense altar in this situation. And he shall burn all its fat on the altar like the fat of the sacrifice of the peace offering. So the priest shall make atonement for him concerning his sin, and it shall be forgiven him. There's no mention of burning this outside the camp. And a little bit later, we'll see what was done with the remainder of the animal. The fourth category, beginning in verse 27, is if any one of the common people sins unintentionally by doing something against any of the commandments of the Lord in anything which ought not to be done and is guilty, or if his sin which he has committed comes to his knowledge, then he shall bring as his offering a kid of the goats, a female without blemish, for his sin which he has committed. And he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and kill the sin offering at the place of the burnt offering. So again, the individual lays his hand on it, and it is the individual that does the killing of the goat. Then the priest shall take some of the blood with his finger, put it on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, and pour all the remaining blood at the base of the altar. He shall remove all its fat, as fat is removed from the sacrifice of the peace offering, and the priest shall burn it on the altar of a sweet aroma to the Lord. So the priest shall make atonement for him, and it shall be forgiven him. And again, there's no mention of taking this outside the camp or burning it outside the camp, as was the case of the first two. Verse 32, it's just basically repetition. If he brings a lamb as a sin offering, he shall bring a female without blemish. Then he shall lay his hand on the head of the sin offering and kill it as an offering at the place. And it's basically the same process that you would have if he brings a goat. But again, there's no mention of him burning outside of the camp. Now, If we go back, we'll continue on here. Right now, if we go back to Leviticus chapter 6, beginning in verse 24, as we said, what happens to the remainder of the animal? Leviticus 6, verse 24, it says, basically here it's the law of the sin offering. It says, also the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and his son, saying, this is the law of the sin offering. In the place where the burnt offering is killed, the sin offering shall be killed before the Lord. It is most holy. The priest who offers it for sin shall eat it. In a holy place it shall be eaten, in the court of the tabernacle of meeting. Everyone who touches its flesh must be holy, and when its blood is sprinkled on any garment, you shall wash that which it was sprinkled in the holy place. So basically, any blood was not to leave the holy place, and it was not to be left on a garment here. But the earthen vessel in which it is boiled shall be broken, and if it is boiled in a bronze pot, it shall be scoured and rinsed in water. All the males among the priests may eat it. It is most holy. So here, that the meat part of the sin offering for a civic leader or for the common person was actually eaten by the priest and his family, or the sons. It appears to be the males. Verse 30, but no sin offering from which any of the blood is brought into the tabernacle of meeting to make atonement in the holy place shall be eaten. It shall be burned in the fire. So that covers, basically, it was the first two that where the blood was taken in to the altar of incense and stuff, that meat was not to be eaten, but that was to be burned. Leviticus chapter 4, verse 7, it says, the blood of the priest offering was brought into the tabernacle as was the blood of the offering for the whole congregation, in Leviticus 4:18. So, and those offerings those sin offerings were burned outside the camp. We see that the sin offering for the priest was a bull, for the congregation a young bull, for a ruler or the common people it was a goat. In the case of the priest or a ruler or a common person, a hand, singular, was laid on the animal. If it was for the congregation, several of the elders would have laid a hand on it. The animal was killed at the tabernacle, not outside the camp. And in each case, some of the blood was put on the horns of the altar of burnt offering, or the bronze altar. The remaining blood was poured at the base of the altar of burnt offerings, and which is, again, the outermost altar. The high priest did two additional things then for himself or the congregation, or the leaders of the congregation, that were not done for the other categories, in that he took some of the bull's blood and brought it to the tabernacle of meeting. He then dipped his finger in the blood and sprinkled some of the blood 7 times in front of the veil of the sanctuary, and he put some of the blood on the horns of the altar of incense. So again, this was the difference of the two. The offering for the priest and the congregation was burned outside the camp. The offering for the civic leader and individual was eaten by the priest. But bottom line is, for all people, no matter what their position, sin was costly. That all sins required a blood atonement, and that was the only solution for their guilt. All situations have the same sequence. There is sin resulting in guilt. There's a blood sacrifice resulting in atonement and forgiveness. And now, concerning the Day of Atonement offerings, we'll start by going over to Exodus chapter 30, and beginning in verse 1. It'll be verse 10. In Exodus 30, verses 1 through 3, we covered the description of the altar of incense, or the golden altar that was next to the Holy of Holies. And down in verse 10, And it says, and Aaron shall make atonement upon his horns once a year with the blood of the sin offering. This is concerning the altar of incense, or the golden altar. Here is the topic. And it says, Aaron shall make atonement upon his horns once a year with the blood of the sin offering of atonement. The King James Version says atonement's plural, and the Hebrew actually is plural. That is what's correct. Once a year he shall make atonement upon it throughout your generations. It is most holy to the Lord. So again, it was still speaking of the golden incense altar here. We saw that Aaron put blood of the sin offering for himself and for the congregation on the horns of the incense altar, but something special or different was to be done on the Day of Atonement, and this offering was the sin offering of atonements. And so now we'll go over to Leviticus 16, and we'll begin in verse 1. Leviticus 16, verse 1. Now the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron when they offered profane fire before the Lord and died. And the Lord said to Moses, tell Aaron your brother not to come in just at any time into the holy place inside the veil before the mercy seat which is on the ark, lest he die, for I will appear in the cloud above the mercy seat. Thus Aaron shall come into the holy place with the blood of a young bull as a sin offering and of a ram as a burnt offering. And he shall put on the holy linen tunic and linen trousers on his body. He shall be girded with a linen sash, and with the linen turban he shall be attired. These are holy garments, therefore he shall wash his body with water and put them on. These were special garments worn by the high priest only on the Day of Atonement. They were referred to as the white garments because they were made from white flax. He basically wore two sets. He had one in the morning and the second in the afternoon. And of course, Exodus 39 has a description of the priestly garments if anyone's interested there. But it was a special garment that he was wearing. Verse 5, and he shall take from the congregation of the children of Israel 2 kids of the goats as a sin offering and 1 ram as a burnt offering. So now, the goats are from the congregation and for the congregation. However, with the sin offering, the offering required by when it says congregation or the church leaders was a bull in Leviticus 4. And goats were the sin offering for the common people. So basically here, atonement, though it says congregation, is a sin offering for each and every individual person. It's basically all inclusive here and down at the individual level. I'll just go back and read from Leviticus 4, verses 13 and 14. It says, now when the whole congregation of Israel sins unintentionally and the thing is hidden from the eyes of the assembly, and they have done something against any of the commandments of the Lord which should not be done and are guilty, when the sin which they have committed has come, the assembly shall offer a young bull for a sin offering and bring it before the tabernacle of meeting. So again, the sin offering for the congregation in Leviticus 4 was for the elders or leaders, but on atonement, the congregation basically includes any and all individuals. We'll continue verse 6 in Leviticus 16. It says, Aaron shall offer the bull as a sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and his house. And he shall take 2 goats and present them before the Lord at the door of the tabernacle of meeting. And then Aaron shall cast lots for the 2 goats, 1 lot for the Lord and the other lot for the scapegoat or Azazel or gate of departure. We'll call him the Azazel goat. Okay. This is the first place in Scripture where lots are cast. And it is the only place where lots are cast for concerning the sacrificial system. There's no other place. Basically here, God is doing the choosing of the goats, not the priest. And God chose how the atonement and the plan of redemption of man would happen or be worked out. It is not man deciding which goat is to be used for which function. And of course, in this age, it is God who decides whom he will call and whom he doesn't. And we can try to convert our friends and relatives all we want. If God is not calling them, they are not being called. It is a decision that God makes. So again here, it is a decision that is not made by the priest, but is made by God. Some have argued that God chooses because one of the goats is blemished on the inside, and the blemished goat is the Azazel goat, which represents Satan. I think that's a bit of a stretch myself to try to come up with that. Satan's blemishes are not hidden on the inside. They are very obvious, I think, in this world, and they are not hidden away inside. Now, back in verse 8, it says, Aaron shall cast lots for the two goats, one lot for the Lord. What does one lot for the Lord mean? The common belief, it means representing the Lord. And if it's representing the Lord, well, of course, the other goat has to represent Satan, is the reasoning that some have. Yet we know that the first goat was filled by Christ. The term for the Lord, we're going to look at a couple of other places where it is used to give us a little understanding in it, where it does not mean in place of or representing the Lord. In Exodus 30, verse 37, it says, but as for the incense which you shall make, you shall not make any for yourselves according to its composition. It shall be to you holy for the Lord. The New International, I just read from the New King James, the New International says holy to the Lord. The New Living Translation says it is reserved for the Lord. The Complete Jewish Bible says you are to treat it as holy for Adonai. And basically here, for the Lord means for his satisfaction. It doesn't mean that it represents the Lord or it represents God. In Numbers 31:28, it says, and levy a tribute for the Lord on the men of war who went out to battle, one of every 500 of the persons, the cattle, the donkeys, and the sheep. Again here, it's levy a tribute for the Lord. The New International says set apart as tribute for the Lord. The New Living says first give the Lord his share of the plunder. Again, the tribute is not representing God. So when here in Leviticus 16, where it says the one goat is for the Lord, it doesn't necessarily mean, or it does not mean, that it is representing the Lord, or that it should be taken that way. Back in verse 15, then he shall kill the goat of the sin offering, which is for the people, or it's basically on account of the people, or on account of the people's uncleanness. And again, it does not mean that the first goat represents the Lord and the other then must represent Satan. We'll continue in verse 9 in Leviticus 16. Verse 9, and Aaron shall bring the goat on which the Lord's lot fell and offer it as a sin offering. But the goat on which the lot fell to be the Azazel shall be presented alive before the Lord to make atonement upon it and to let it go as the scapegoat or the Azazel into the wilderness. Some of the newer translations of the Bible have changed and totally corrupted the last part to read. The New Living Translation says, it is sent away to Azazel in the wilderness. The New Revised Standard says that it may be sent away into the wilderness to Azazel. The New King James says that the goat was to be the Azazel and was given the role of the complete removal of sin. But we have various new versions of the Bible that say this goat is being sent to a being or a personality called Azazel, and that is based on Jewish folklore, is where that comes from. I'm going to read just a small quote here from Jamieson, Fawcett, and Brown commentary concerning the Azazel here. And it says, it can be proved that the demon called Azazel did not become known to the Jews until the time of the Babylonian captivity, when they learned it from the Chaldean and Persian legends, whence the name, and it was actually Azalzel, or Azael, was introduced into the apocryphal book of Enoch and other Jewish works. So basically the idea of the Azazel being Satan was introduced during the Babylonian captivity to the Jews from the Babylonians and from the Persian religion. Now, he mentions here the book of the apocryphal book of Enoch, and many times in the Church of God, people and ministers have gone to the book of Enoch to try to prove that Azazel is Satan, even though it says Azazel the demon. It does not say Azazel the devil or Azazel the Satan, but Azazel the demon. Okay, the book of Enoch was written around the 3rd century BC. Of course, some claim it was written by the pre-flood Enoch, which is not the case. But this book of Enoch is an apocryphal literature. Apocryphal means of doubtful authenticity. So it's very questionable authenticity as to who wrote it and when it was actually written. I have read bits of pieces of that book of Enoch, and my conclusion is a book about demons inspired by demons. That's the best way I can describe that particular book. Radio Church of God, or later what became Worldwide Church of God, adopted the teachings from the Seventh-day Adventists concerning the Azazel goat. And that was probably passed down through Duggar through the Sardis era, I would imagine. In the mid-1800s is when the Seventh-day Adventists did research and came up with the idea of Azazel being Satan. What that is based on, I'll go through these slowly, they're real short, but the sources that they used were, number one, Jewish folklore. Number two, the book of Enoch, Azazel the demon. Number three, Arabic tradition. And get this one, the Quran and Muslims' writings and traditions. There was no scriptural basis used in determining that the goat represents Satan. Those were the sources that were used. We'll continue in verse 11 of Leviticus 16. And Aaron shall bring the bull of the sin offering, which is for himself, and make atonement for himself and for his house. And he shall kill the bull as a sin offering, which is for himself. So here the high priest makes the sin offering for himself and for his family. There is no mention of him laying a hand on the head of the bull. There is no transference of sin going on this bull. Verse 12, then he shall take a censer full of burning coals of fire from the altar before the Lord with his hands full of sweet incense beaten fine, and bring it inside the veil. Now, this is the only time of year that the priest went inside the veil and into the Holy of Holies. And verse 13, and he shall put the incense on the fire before the Lord, that the cloud of incense may cover the mercy seat, that is the testimony, lest he die. He had to make sure that there was enough smoke in that Holy of Holies when he went inside that he could not see the mercy seat, because God's presence was there. So he was not allowed to see the presence of God. With the threat of the death penalty, I'm sure he would have been very, very careful to make sure that there was plenty of smoke in there, that when his life was at stake, if there wasn't enough smoke and he saw the presence of God. So his job wasn't easy. Verse 14, he shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger on the mercy seat on the east side, and before the mercy seat he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. Then he shall kill the goat of the sin offering, which is for the people, bring its blood inside the veil, do with that blood as he did with the blood of the bull, and sprinkle it on the mercy seat and before the mercy seat. So he goes through the same procedure here again with the blood of the atonement goat that is killed. There is no mention of laying on of hands on the head of that goat. There were no sins transferred to this goat. So there are 2 differences from the regular sin offering. There's no mention of hands being laid on either the bull or the goat. There was no transfer of sin. And of course, the blood was taken inside the Holy of Holies. This blood was sinless blood, representing the sinless blood of Christ, and accepted in the presence of God. It had to be sinless blood to be taken into the Holy of Holies. We'll continue in verse 16. He shall make atonement for the holy place because of the uncleanness of the children of Israel, and because of their transgressions for all their sins. And so he shall do for the tabernacle of meeting, which remains among them in the midst of their uncleanness. There shall be no man in the tabernacle of meeting when he goes in to make atonement in the holy place until he comes out, that he may make atonement for himself, for his household, and for all the assembly of Israel. And he shall go out to the altar that is before the Lord, that is the golden altar of incense here, and make atonement for it. And he shall take some of the blood of the bull and some of the blood of the goat and put it on the horns of the altar all around. So now the priest puts some of that blood of that bull and on the goat and puts it on the horns of the incense altar, of basically the golden altar of incense. Then he shall sprinkle some of the blood on it with his finger 7 times, cleanse it, and consecrate it from the uncleanness of the children of Israel. The blood of the sin offerings throughout the year was put on the horns of the altar of incense. This made that altar a repository, basically, of the sins of the priest and of the congregation. This blood now cleanses the altar of incense. It was done once a year. There was this cleansing of the altar of incense. The horns of the altar of incense had to be purged by blood once a year using the sin offering of atonements. In Exodus 30, verse 10, I'll just read it quickly here. And Aaron shall make atonement upon his horns once a year with the blood of the sin offering of atonements, plural. Once a year he shall make atonement upon it throughout your generations. So again, it's the cleansing of the altar of incense here. So there's 3 things to consider about these sin offerings. No hands were laid on the bull or on the goat, indicating no transference of sin. Their blood was taken into the holy place, and some of the blood of the bull and the goat was put on the horns of the altar of incense to cleanse it. The blood of the sin offerings throughout the year was from animals that had sin transferred to them by the laying on of hands. So this would indicate that the blood on the Day of Atonement was pure blood or sinless blood. It was not carrying sin. And the blood of the bull and the goat was used for purification. And only blood that did not represent sin was brought into the veil or inside the Holy of Holies. We'll look at Hebrews chapter 9, beginning in verse 11. Hebrews 9:11, it says, "But Christ came as high priest of good things to come with a greater and more perfect tabernacle not made with hands, that is, not of this creation. Not with the blood of goats or calves, but with his own blood he entered the most holy place once for all, having obtained eternal redemption. For if the blood of bulls and goats and the ashes of a heifer, sprinkling the unclean sacrifices for the purifying the flesh, how much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God." So again, this blood taken in there represented Christ without sin. And okay, the blood was taken into the Holy of Holies, represented the blood of Christ that was without spot. It did not represent the sins of the people. And no sin had been transferred to the sacrificed bull or goat. And the blood of the first goat was for purification purposes. We'll continue in verse 20 of Leviticus 16. It says, and when he had made an end of atoning for the holy place, the tabernacle of meeting and the altar, so basically it was because of the sinfulness of the people that this annual purging needed to be done of the in the tabernacle itself. It says, he shall bring the live goat. Verse 21, he shall lay both his hands on the head of the live goat, confess over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel, and all their transgressions concerning all their sins, putting them on the head of the goat, and shall send it away into the wilderness by the hand of a suitable man. In this case, Aaron lays both hands on the head of the goat. In a regular sin offering, he laid only one hand on the head of the animal. Here it says he confesses it over it all the iniquities of the children of Israel, all their transgressions and all their sins. Iniquities is basically evil, moral evil, and perversity. Transgressions is revolt, or just plain can mean outright rebellion. And of course, sin is the missing the mark. So in this process, he transferred all of these sins to the people. The sin offering was made, that we saw in Leviticus 4, was only made for unintentional sin or missing the mark. Here, all sins are transferred to the goat that the regular sin offering did not cover. So it's complete and all. It covers everyone. Verse 22, the goat shall bear on itself the iniquities to an uninhabited land, and he shall release the goat in the wilderness. Again, all the iniquities, transgressions, and sins of the people are laid on its head. The live goat bears all of these sins into the wilderness and away from the tabernacle, or away from God's presence. We'll quickly look at Isaiah 53, verses 5 and 6. Isaiah 53, 5 and 6. And it says, but he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities, the chastisement of our peace was upon him, and by his stripes we were healed. All we like sheep have gone astray, we have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord laid on him the iniquity of us all. So again, this goat is the one carrying away all of the sin. It is the iniquity of all. This goat basically has a double curse laid on it. One of the curses is having all of the sins of every description laid on it. And the second curse is that it was driven away from the holy place and driven away from God's presence. Galatians 3:13, quickly here, Galatians 3:13, it says, I'll just read it here. It says, Christ has redeemed us from the curse of the law, having become a curse for us. For it is written, cursed is everyone who hangs on the tree. So here we see that he took on the part of this goat that carried everything away. In a regular sin offering, the animals were killed at the tabernacle, and those that were burned outside the camp. The goat that was killed on atonement was killed at the tabernacle, and the Azazel goat died away from the tabernacle and the camp, and of course died in the wilderness. And we know that Hebrews 13:12 says that Christ suffered with outside the gate. Now, there is one other example of an offering consisting of two animals. In this case, it's two birds, but where one is killed and has its blood shed, and the other lives and is sent away. We'll go to Leviticus 14, beginning in verse 1. Leviticus 14, verse 1. It says, then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, this shall be the law of the leper for the day of his cleansing. He shall be brought to the priest, And the priest shall go out of the camp, and the priest shall examine him, and indeed if the leprosy is healed in the leper, then the priest shall command to take for him who is to be cleansed 2 living clean birds, cedar wood, scarlet, and hyssop. And the priest shall command that one of the birds be killed in an earthen vessel over running water. As for the living bird, he shall take it, the cedar, the wood, and the scarlet, and the hyssop, and dip them and the living bird in the blood of the bird that was killed over the running water. And he shall sprinkle it 7 times on him who has been cleansed from the leprosy, and shall pronounce him clean, and shall let the living bird loose in the open field. So the first bird was killed, and its blood was shed to provide a cleansing. The second bird was released for the complete removal of the leprosy, carry it totally away. It does not say or imply that the second bird was the source of leprosy. It wasn't Satan. The birds provide 2 different functions, but they did not represent Christ and Satan in this process. We'll go back to Leviticus 16, verse 23. Leviticus 16:23. It says, Then Aaron shall come into the tabernacle of meeting, and shall take off the linen garments which he has put on when he went into the holy place, and shall leave them there. According to the Talmud, those garments were worn only once and left there and never to be worn again. So it was a one time only that they were worn. Verse 24, And he shall wash his body with water in the holy place, and put on his garments, and come out, and offer his burnt offering and burnt offerings of the people, and make atonement for himself and for the people. The fat of the sin offering he shall burn on the altar. And he who released the goat as a scapegoat shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp. So the man that took the goat into the wilderness was considered unclean and had to wash his clothes and bathe before he was even allowed back into the camp. Verse 27, The bull for the sin offering and the goat for the sin offering, whose blood was brought in to make atonement in the holy place, shall be carried outside of the camp, and they shall be burned in the fire, their skins, their flesh, and their offal. So, like the offerings, the sin offering for the priest and the congregation, the bull and the goat were to be burned out, the remains were to be burned outside of the camp. Only the blood of the bull and the goat that were killed was used, while the rest of the animal was disposed of. This is on atonement. God was showing that it was only the only blood that atoned for Israel's sins, that only blood would atone for their sins. Only the blood cleansed the tabernacle, the priest, the people, and the land from defilement caused by sin. Hebrews 9:22, I'll just quickly read it here. Hebrews 9:22, And according to the law, almost all things are purified with blood, and without the shedding of blood is no remission. Again, it's the blood was used for purification. Verse 28, Then he who burns them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water, and afterward he may come into the camp. So whoever did the burning of the bull and of the goat was considered unclean, and he had to wash his clothes and to bathe. This shall be a statute forever for you. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall afflict your souls and do no work at all, whether a native of your own country or a stranger who dwells with you. For on that day the priest shall make atonement for you to cleanse you, that you may be clean from all your sins before the Lord. So the cleansing, again, was for everyone. It is a Sabbath of solemn rest for you, and you shall afflict your souls. It is a statute forever. And the priest who was anointed and consecrated to minister as priest in his father's place shall make atonement and put on the linen clothes, the holy garments. Then he shall make atonement for the holy sanctuary, and he shall make atonement for the tabernacle of meetings and for the altar, and he shall make atonement for the priests and for all the people of the assembly. This shall be an everlasting statute for you to make atonement for the children of Israel for all their sins once a year. And he did as the Lord commanded Moses. So the Day of Atonement basically gave Israelites a clean slate or a fresh start. And of course, it points to the future when this day will literally be fulfilled, and the whole world, not just the Israelites, but the whole world will be given a clean start. When Christ began his ministry, in Luke chapter 4, verse 16, he started out his ministry here by basically quoting from Isaiah, but I'll read it. It says, "So he came to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, as his custom was. He went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day and stood up to read. And he was handed the book of the prophet Isaiah. And when he had opened the book, he found the place where it was written, 'The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed.'" And verse 19 here, it says, "To proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." And if you look at it, most Bibles have a marginal reference, and he is quoting Isaiah 61, verses 1 and 2. And I'd like to go over to Isaiah 61, verses 1 and 2. And we'll find that he did not quote the entire verse, and actually why he stops where he did. Isaiah 61, verses 1 and 2, it says, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because the Lord has anointed me to preach good tidings to the poor. He sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives, and the opening of the prisons to those who are bound, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord." But that is not the end of the verse, but that is all that he quoted. If you look there, chances are your marginal reference will point you to Leviticus 25, verse 9. And, actually, we'll start in verse 8 on Leviticus 25. Leviticus 25. And it says, "And you shall count 7 Sabbaths of years for yourself, 7 times 7 years. And the time of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall be to you 49 years. It has been understood that acceptable day of the Lord, points back here to verse 9, "And you shall cause the trumpet of the Jubilee to sound on the 10th day of the 7th month, on the day of atonement. You shall make this trumpet sound throughout all your land." It is totally accepted that the acceptable year of the Lord was pointing to the Jubilee year, and as we see here, it begins on the Day of Atonement. So, verse 10, "And you shall consecrate the 50th year and proclaim liberty throughout all the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you, and each of you shall return to his possession, and each of you shall return to his family." That 50th year shall be a jubilee to you. It shall, in it you shall neither sow nor reap what grows of its own accord, nor gather the grapes or your unattended vines. For it is the jubilee; it is holy to you. You shall eat its produce from the field. This is the year of jubilee. Each of you shall return to his own possession. Again, the jubilee year begins on the Day of Atonement, and not on the Feast of Trumpets, which is the beginning of the civil year. That means that the 7-year cycles begin on the Day of Atonement. The 3rd tithe year begins on the Day of Atonement, not on trumpets. The Day of Atonement marks the beginning of the millennium. And here it is, if he was preaching the acceptable year of the Lord, or this Jubilee year, is a clean start for the survivors of the 12 tribes of Israel, and basically any other survivors that there are on the earth at the time of the kingdom. The people will finally be returning to their promised land. And of course, in the Jubilee year, the land went back to its original owners, if it had been sold or leased or whatever. And in that Jubilee year, God provides the food, both physical and spiritual, needed in that Jubilee year. And it, especially here this first year at the beginning of the millennium, and we definitely are all looking forward to the fulfillment of that day. So again, it is all possible through the sin offerings of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the basic sin offering, but especially the special sin offerings on the Day of Atonement.